So the Alto Knights is out, and I watched it a few days ago. This is pretty much the last traditional gangster movie, I think it's fair to say. And what I mean by that is, in addition to the fact that you hardly get any mainstream mob movies anymore, is that it stars Robert De Niro. It's directed by Barry Levinson, who directed Bugsy, and it's written by Nicholas Pileggi, who of course wrote Goodfellas and Casino. These guys are all ancient now, and with the likes of Joe Pesci retiring, Al Pacino and Harvey Keitel winding down, Scorsese having said what he needed to say, Coppola not wanting to go anywhere near mafia movies again, the best is over. The golden age of mob movies is long gone. Even if we get new ones, and even if they're good, they're not going to be made by people who experienced those times, so they'll lack that authenticity. And really, it's a bonus for a film like this to come out. A De Niro mafia movie in 2025, when the guy is in his early 80s. And if you watch it like that, it isn't bad at all. I'm serious. I know I've labelled it a disappointment in the title, but it isn't a terrible movie. Calling it a disappointment is maybe a bit unfair, and I think a lot of people are going to trash it because they hate De Niro, but it isn't as bad as many will make it out to be. It's not great either. It's watchable, it's average. And it's neither good enough nor bad enough to really be invested emotionally into how good it is, to be angry with it or anything. It doesn't leave much of an impression either way. I suppose it depends on how you watch it. If you're hoping for The Godfather Part 4, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. That goes without saying. If you're like me, and you've seen films like Chicago Overcoat, John Travolta's Gotti, Mobtown, and you're acutely aware that that is the standard of mafia films these days, not Goodfellas and Casino, then there's plenty to enjoy. It's better than those three films I just mentioned. It's a competent film, well made, structured. It's just kind of dry, kind of boring. It feels like a movie directed and starring guys in their 80s and produced and written by guys in their 90s. I completely forgot Nicholas Pileggi wrote the script until the credits started rolling. I mean, I know he's mafia movie royalty, but can a guy that old really come up with zippy, energetic mob dialogue at his age? So let's get down to it. For those who don't know, The Alto Knights tells the story of mob bosses Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. Genovese was the boss of the Luciano crime family until he fled the country after heat from the cops, leaving Frank Costello in charge. World War II delayed Genovese's return, and by the time he gets back, things are running fine and dandy, and the commission, who ran the mafia, are happy with Costello in charge, who in general avoids controversy and has a good public image. Genovese is back and he wants what he thinks he's owed. He's into stuff like drugs, and this is where tensions between the two men begin, and it eventually leads to Genovese to put out a failed hit on Costello. That's not a spoiler. The attempted hit happens in like the first scene, and the movie is then narrated by Costello as he tells the story of the two men leading up to the shooting, plus the fallout. It goes back and forward in time, and combined with the narration and old man telling his story format, it does feel very Scorsese light, almost like a version of The Irishman, but without Marty's craft. Now let's get to the elephant in the room, the main gimmick of the film. De Niro plays both parts of Vito Genovese and Frank Costello. I've made a few videos on this before the film came out. I said I thought it sounded pointless, it would be distracting, it felt something cheap to do, and having seen the film, I feel vindicated in my criticisms because it did feel completely pointless, without merit, and not worth the amount of effort it must have taken for the filmmakers to do. In fact, it was a huge missed opportunity to pair up De Niro with another actor from his generation one last time. Pacino, Keitel, Christopher Walken even. In fact, the Genovese character seems tailor-made for Joe Pesci. Perhaps there's a meta, reflective aspect to it that went over my head. De Niro grappling with the desire to put the gangster movie behind him, fighting his urge to continue doing it because it's so fun, as manifested by the two main characters. But that's probably looking too deep into it. It's just distracting. It doesn't derail the film, it isn't as laughable as it sounds, but it's just futile. There was no narrative purpose, no art house reasoning, say. There's two separate characters who have a beef, and they're both played by the same actor because the 90-plus-year-old producer Irvin Winkler couldn't think of a better actor. It's almost impossible to be fully immersed into the movie because you're always aware that De Niro's talking to himself. And it's not as if the movie treats it as a necessary evil, a bit like The Irishman and the de-aging tech. Here, it draws your attention to it. There's a scene, for example, where Costello pulls up in his car and waits outside a shop. Then Genovese pulls up, and they both walk into a diner and sit at a table. It's all done very slow, very deliberate. It's like the filmmakers want us to think, wow, I'm amazed, how did they achieve that? But I shouldn't be thinking, how did they achieve that? Watching a scene of two characters walk into a store, I should be immersed into the story. I should be thinking about the two characters' beef and how they're going to try and now sort it out. The film just shoots itself in the foot with this ridiculous dual casting decision that should have been experimented with during the pre-production concept stage and then scrapped. Now, in terms of De Niro's performances, I should say, let's start with Costello. De Niro plays Costello essentially as himself. If you've seen De Niro in real life, in interviews, he mumbles and grumbles when he talks. He stumbles and stutters, he gets tongue-tied and struggles to get a sentence out sometimes. He just has that kind of personality. But that's how he plays Costello. It's basically what he's like in real life. And it's kind of boring, I have to say. He does a job, it's functional, but there's nothing too special about the performance that separates it from De Niro's other performances from the past 20 years. And it's not the most interesting character to play either, what with Costello being pretty reserved in the film. Plus, he looks like De Niro. In fact, weirdly, De Niro looks older in the film than he does in real life. I don't know, the makeup that's slapped on him, it's weird. Genovese, on the other hand, is paranoid. He's loud, he's obnoxious, he's profane, and he's full of energy. And De Niro's Genovese is very fun to watch. He looks like he's having a lot of fun, and there's a lot of classic De Niro in there. I would say the way he talks is a mix of his Al Capone, his Jimmy Conway, and his Johnny Boy. And if we didn't have this performance in the film, I might think that De Niro is just really old and tired. But we can clearly see he still brings something to the table as proven by the Genovese character. There's scenes of him at his social club with his crew where they're bantering and breaking balls, which was fun. Like I said at the beginning of this review, it's like a bonus, a throwback to a kind of thing we're not seeing anymore, and we're not going to see anymore. And De Niro's Genovese made a good pairing with Cosmo Jarvis's Vincent Gigante and another actor, an older one whose name I don't know. I think it was Robert Uracola, who actually died before the film came out. He was really fun in the film. He had a good couple of lines that made me laugh. And it was nice seeing a lot of familiar faces from mob cinema. People who grew up watching things like Goodfellas, Casino, The Sopranos, you'll see a lot of faces you remember. De Niro looks good as Genovese too, from a distance. He looks like the real guy with the glasses, the hat and the chin. But when the camera is close up, you can't help but staring at all the prosthetics slapped to his face. He looks like a Madame Tussauds mannequin on the run. I remember one scene where he's using a sun reflector outside and his face looked like a pumpkin. You're thinking that Pacino as Big Boy Caprice is about to walk into the frame. The issue is magnified when Costello and Genovese are in the same scene, because one of them looks like a De Niro one slip away from falling into his grave, and the other is De Niro in a hat, glasses and plastic around his chin. His performances were distinct, but not distinct enough in my opinion. If you want to be really harsh, you could say one was De Niro with a high-pitched voice and the other with a low-pitched voice. He does this thing with his S's, which has become more pronounced as he's gotten older, a kind of, these guys, they got these noses for these things. He's quite heavy with the S's, and both characters do it. Maybe he's lost some articulation abilities as he's aged, but the two men did not sound different enough in my opinion. In fact, let me ask you something. Which De Niro character is this? Is it Vito or is it Frank? When I saw the film's trailer, I thought it was Genovese, and when I was watching the movie, I genuinely wasn't sure. It was only when the character turned around I realized it was actually Frank Costello. That's not the kind of problem you should have when watching a movie. I would have much preferred him playing one character or the other. In fact, I think it would have aided his performance. Think about it. De Niro is a method actor. He tries to embody the character he's playing. And yes, it's later in his career, so he isn't as intense, and he probably doesn't do all those crazy stuff he used to. But I can't really see an actor like him from the Strasbourg school having an easy time of switching between characters every scene. If you give him one role, perhaps he goes all out. But with two, we get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. If De Niro's paycheck performances in crappy comedies are C grade, and he brings his A game for Marty in The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon, I would put his performance in this film as a B grade one, on par with his decent turns in films like Joker or The Wizard of Lies, another Levinson project. It's a movie worth watching for De Niro fans. In fact, speaking of Scorsese, there's one quick thing I want to mention. There's a scene where Genovese beats a man, and the way it's shot is from behind a big curtain, because he's up on a roof and somebody has their washing out. You just see his silhouette, and it's more than likely a double was used, and it looks great. I think back to that infamous grocery store beatdown in The Irishman and wonder to this day why Scorsese didn't do something similar. Anyway, the film's story will be familiar to mafia movie junkies. It's all done pretty decently, but there's nothing here you haven't seen before. If you're not familiar with the history, there may be some surprises in it, like what happens to Albert Anastasia. And there's a bit of a strange twist to the historical narrative near the end regarding the infamous Appalachian Summit. It felt like they didn't know how to end it, so they threw the real history out of the window, and in which one character does something that felt very out of character. The movie moves along at a brisk pace in the first hour or so, and it's entertaining to watch, but after that Vito Genovese isn't in it as much, unfortunately, and the movie does slow down. It did feel like there was some improvisation going on too, and I think some scenes went on for a bit too long and could have done with tightening up. Sometimes characters just talk and not about much, and then the scene will fade to black as if they're still going but the movie itself is so bored of their conversation. I think I would have preferred if the movie, instead of doing the whole they're the flip side of the same coin, which handicaps the film. I mean, there's loads of scenes that are supposed to mirror each other and it's just a bit clunky. Instead of that, they should have honed in on the Costello character, make him the pivot of the movie, which they did to be fair, but go deeper. Make it his story from his rise, his stable reign and eventual fall. Have the Genovese character played by someone else, either De Niro with someone else doing Costello or the other way around. And have this guy pop up and be an absolute wild spanner in the works who threatens to topple the peace Costello has created. And he struggles to keep a lid on him before the shocking hit attempt. They did try to do that, but it felt like the movie was insisting on the trope that the two characters are polar opposites. There was too many scenes directly comparing the two, but it feels forced and you never got a sense the two men were even close, especially with the movie giving away the Costello hit in the opening scene. And instead of being a pivot, Costello comes off as a passenger sometimes. Him being name-dropped during Genovese's divorce case should have been a bombshell moment that causes a domino effect and spirals Costello's life out of control, and perhaps that's what Levinson was going for, but it just kind of felt like, this happened. And then this happened, then this happened. I was shocked at the amount of archive footage there is in the film. It's one thing to show a real photo to accompany what the narrator is saying. It's another thing to have what felt like 30% of the film's story told through still images and old photos. It felt really cheap, like the money was all used up on De Niro's prosthetics and digital touch-up, and they didn't have the cash for flashbacks. Costello tells us too much. He talks about himself, about his past, about Genovese. We're denied the opportunity to experience it for ourselves. It felt like it might as well have been a PowerPoint presentation at times, or a Cineranta video. Plus, there was a lack of proper wide shots or establishing shots, which again gave the film a bit of a cheap feel. It's unfortunate because a great deal of this film feels authentic, especially when it comes to the casting of the supporting cast and background extras. Being reminded you're watching actors on a film set in the 23rd century is thankfully not a problem this film has, unlike say Gotti or Mobtown. See, I always root for a film. I want it to be good, and from that angle, it's a decent film for what it is, but there is that lingering aroma as you're watching it that this 6 out of 10 film, if made 15 years ago when everyone involved had a bit more energy and De Niro played one role, we could have been seeing a more of an 8 out of 10 picture. There's a few moments of comedy, a bit of suspense, and a chance to see De Niro in one last gangster movie playing two different roles. There's fun to be had with the Alto Knights, but it's not going to be the best film you see this year. The whole thing is hinging on De Niro carrying it, and he does a decent job of it, but aside from that, there isn't that much else here. It's ordinary and pedestrian. We're just kind of past this, aren't we? I mean, the climax of this movie is the same scene that was parodied in the De Niro mob comedy Analyze This. It's literally beyond parody. Have you seen the Alto Knights? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.